Hello, everyone, and welcome to Age Equity Alliance's Giving Tuesday, where all day today we have been sharing training and discussions with brilliant people like the person on the call with me today, Ashton Applewhite. But before I introduce Ashton, guess I should say I'm Sheila Callahan, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director for Age Equity Alliance. I want to tell you just a little bit about it, and then I'll introduce Ashton and we'll jump right into our discussion. So Age Equity Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, volunteer run, and we work with organizations, communities, and government entities to evaluate and address age equity gaps. In addition to training, age equity audits, speaking, and consulting for private and public sector workplaces, we're also proud to say that we're knowledge partners with AARP, the World Economic Forum, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in their collaborative global initiative called Living, Learning, and Earning Longer. And that's focused on creating strong all-aged work cultures. So Age Equity Alliance, you know, one of the things that is unique about us is that we're focused on creating age equity across the age spectrum. We know that age bias is a cycle and we have to stop it. We have to understand where the ways in which age bias manifests in the workplace across the age spectrum and bring everyone together so that we can work together and create a workplace where we all want to age in. So I am grateful, honored, and delighted to call today's panelist, Ashton Applewhite, a friend, colleague, and a mentor. She is also a member of the Age Equity Alliance Board of Directors. So Ashton almost doesn't deserve an intro. She's been recognized by the New York Times, the New Yorker, National Public Radio, the American Society on Aging as an expert on ageism. She blogs at This Chair Rocks. She speaks widely at venues ranging from the United Nations, as I said, TED, Main Stage. She's written for Harper's, Guardian, New York Times, and she's also the voice of Yo, Is This Ageist? And if you haven't checked out that site, I mean, I learned so much from you, Ashton, every time I read one of your Yo, Is This Ageist? And so I hope we'll talk a lot about that too. So welcome, Ashton. Today, we're going to be talking about ageism and ableism and the myths that drive them. So, I mean, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's like, where do you even start? I mean, that's like a lot.
Well, I want to make people think of aging, that's kind of paradox, in the biggest possible sense. I mean, we, in an ageist culture, which is to say one imbued with negative stereotypes and myths about getting older, we have this idea of aging is just sort of yucky, sad stuff that happens to you at the end. I mean, and aging is what happens the minute we're born. It's not something annoying that old people do. It is how we move through life. And that is why, I mean, if you had told me 15 years ago, I'd be fascinated by aging and thinking about it all the time, I would have said, why do I want to think about something icky and depressing all the time? And then what can I say? You know, I taught myself a bunch and learned a bunch from a lot of other people. I learn a lot from you too, Sheila. And it's so interesting. There is no domain that it is irrelevant to. It's incredibly important for our future on the planet. So, you know, it's such a big and fascinating subject. But the paradox part is that I also want a world in which age is less relevant, in which age is an important, you know, component of our identity. We claim it, we name it, but it is reduced to the very small, relatively small place it plays in shaping what we're interested in and who we want to hang out with, where it belongs.
So that's very interesting. You know, this whole idea of we have to have relevancy around the topic. It's almost like we have to build relevancy around the topic before we can get to that place where it's irrelevant, because people have such warped ideology around age and what it means, and they attach these assumptions around capabilities, and that's that whole thing where there's this like merging, overlap between ageism and ableism. And one of the things that you're trying to do is you're trying to help people understand, well, what is the difference between ageism and ableism? So why don't we jump in with that?
Sure. With a small qualifier, I think people understand that aging is really important.
Yeah.
And relevant every time, when we wake up in the morning, when we see ourselves in relation to others, our careers, our families, what we need to do is hack down the screen or the veil or the weeds that make it seem like a fearsome topic that we don't want to engage with. I think we all know it's relevant. Certainly anyone who can't get a job because of how old they are knows how damn relevant it is. Ageism, the dictionary definition, ageism is prejudice and discrimination on the basis of age. Ableism, which was a new word to me, I think only 10 years ago, is the same, prejudice and discrimination on the basis of mental or physical, cognitive or physical function. We are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about what someone is capable of or interested in on the basis of age, and ableist when we make assumptions about their cognitive or physical capacity on the basis of how we assume their minds or bodies might work. And, and needless to say, they commingle a lot. And I got on a tear about this subject in the wake of the pandemic. I mean, in the early days, because of the messaging, which was basically all around the world. An early person to put the idea in my head was, oh God, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization,
Yeah.
who said part of the lax global response is because of the early messaging that the virus is only, in quotes, going to hurt, kill older people and sick people. And sick is a proxy for disability in this context. And of course, it didn't turn out to be like that. And when it turned out that the virus did affect also healthy people, younger people, then finally the world was galvanized. But I thought this is a really tangible way to help people see the lethal global outcome of not looking at our biases around aging and incapacity. And the other crucial part of it is that so much of what we think of as ageism, apprehension, which is human. There's nothing, it's not like the apprehension is going to disappear. It's part of looking at our lives in context. But so much of our apprehension about getting older is actually about how our minds and bodies might change as we grow older. And that is not ageism, because plenty of younger people are disabled and plenty of older people escape almost all impairment. Some part of your body is going to fall apart. That is inevitable. Before you all came on, I was showing my x-ray of my brand new shoulder, which I had a total shoulder replacement on October 8th. And there is a hunk of titanium in this shoulder about the size of a baseball bat. It's kind of terrifying. With me, it's my bones. So far, brain holding up okay. But of course, we do this in unique ways. Shoulder replacements are rare in 69-year-olds, but it's really important to separate out those things to understand what we're up against, especially in the workplace where, you go first, Sheila. What are, you're dealing with employers. What do you hear them say about mental and cognitive, physical and cognitive function?
I think that they lump everything into age, and I think that they haven't learned how to see the difference in it. But I do think that organizations are starting to wake up to this whole kind of building momentum around workplace age inclusivity and equity. I said on my last panel discussion, I was talking about how when I first started writing for Forbes, it's been almost 3 years now, Ashton, it's hard to believe. But when I first started writing for Forbes, nobody else in major media or online media was writing about workplace age discrimination or age bias or implicit bias or the need for age equity. Nobody was writing about that. The only place I could go to get research and reference and learn was academic, academia. And now, everybody's writing about it. And that's exactly what an activist wants to have happen. They want everybody talking about what you're talking about. So I do see that there are some changes, and
I see that in my own, who wants to hear from me is a bit of a litmus test, and I am getting many more invitations from a DEI. Have you? I don't know if you've seen it with the A added on, but A for accessibility, which is fantastic, which is an idea, an example of how accessibility is being included as it should be in this initiative, because older workers want flex time, and we need accessible facilities. And of course, the overarching point is that benefits everyone, people trying to juggle caregiving schedules for people of any age, students, people trying to juggle a bunch of gigs in the gig economy. Those changes benefit everyone.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the areas of focus I believe that sets Age Equity Alliance apart, is that we do focus on age issues across the age spectrum. And I think that's really, really important, because we've got to break the cycle. So I wanted to ask you.
Otherwise, it's so common for issues to be framed as, young people not being nasty to old people, or old people hanging on to jobs that young people deserve. Totally false framing. It's called the fallacy of the lump of labor. Is this idea that the amount and nature of work is fixed, which it is not. But the minute we start saying, well, younger people are, or what you commonly see from our end of it is older workers are better than younger workers. Any frame, every individual, every age cohort has its strengths and its liabilities-ish, except you can't speak of everyone the same age as being alike in any way, really. So we need to make a workforce where people, of course, are judged for what they bring to the job, regardless of their age and their skin color and who they sleep with and so on. And you get then the diverse workforce that works best and that is the best suited to be agile and adaptable to this incredibly fast-moving global economy.
So let's talk about some of the myths. And I guess you do a lot of myth busting on your Yo, is this ageist, and with everything you do, obviously. But let's talk about some of the most prominent myths that are perpetuating or creating resistance. Ashton, just last week, I'm like tagging you on LinkedIn going, well, there's another discussion, another somebody who says that people are past their peak age, or that one older person resigning would make space for 3 younger people. And to that I say, then you're not paying them enough, because we're talking about skills, right?
Yeah. Let's not forget that ageism, discriminating against younger and older workers, who benefits? Employers and ruthless, organizations, companies, factories, whatever, that profit when workers are pitted against each other, whether it's immigrants from other countries that might not have papers that can be so easily exploited, or whether it's stay-at-home moms versus moms in the paid workforce, arguing about who's a better mom, where, if we could close the gender wage gap, women could choose whether or not to stay home. The gender wage gap persists because it is profitable. Ageism is profitable to companies. And as long as we're falling for old versus young arguments, we're not lifting all the boats. And who among us doesn't know older or younger people whose welfare is important to us, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so important that, there are just so many things. My brain is going 100 miles an hour because I want to talk to you about so many things at the same time.
Well, I'll tell you the mother of all stereotypes.
All right, tell me that.
It's like the stereotype, because the idea of a stereotype is that all members of a group are the same. And all stereotypes are ill-informed and wrong. but especially when it comes to age, because the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. The geeky way that scholars put it is that the defining characteristic of late life is heterogeneity. Right? It's why doctors say if you've seen one 80-year-old, you've seen one 80-year-old. The longer we live, the less our age, the less that number says about what we're capable of physically, cognitively, socially, because we age in different ways at different rates. You know, every newborn is unique, but 17-year-olds have a lot more in common developmentally, physically, socially than 37-year-olds, and so on out. So any generalization about any group is wrong, frankly, factually wrong. But to say anything is true of older people is inaccurate by orders of magnitude.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And it makes perfect sense.
It does when you think about it. And yet we think of like, oh, everyone in a retirement home is the same age, old.
Yeah,
You know, when they can span 3 or 4 decades, we would never think of everyone between age 20 and 50 as the same. And they are way more alike than people, between the ages of 60 and 90, whether they live in a retirement home or all over the world.
Absolutely. So we're about halfway through our 30-minute discussion. So I want to ask that those who are on the call, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Ashton, just drop them in the chat. And then Ashton, one of the things that I want to talk about next is I love the fact that employers are beginning to wake up and they're really trying to embrace all ages. And sometimes they do it in a way that they don't realize doesn't exactly help the matter. So for example, I remember one time I was on a panel discussion and one of the other panelists represented a well-known company in the food industry. And she spoke about their DEI initiative, which she was very, very proud of. And I love that passion, right? But
yeah, you want to encourage it, of course.
But the tagline, the company's tagline was about being eternally 25.
Now, how's that working out?
Yeah. So let's talk about, I mean, they're trying, but this whole idea of being eternally 25, or another one was where an organization referred to their older employees as wisers. Wisers. I think that was what it was. Wiser.
I mean, that's sort of the flip side of the coin. Stereotypes can be benevolent also. And one is sort of the passive granny or the wise elder. As we go through life, we definitely accumulate experience. That is a characteristic. That is when you can say older people have more experience. And that is a generalization that is true. Whether or not we have learned from those experiences is unique. And the lessons we have taken away are unique depending on our, on our identity, on where in the world we live, on how much privilege we enjoy, and on and on and on. So, I don't love wisers because it implies that younger people are less wise. And we don't want a society that gives more. We want older people to be held up as valuable. We want a world where no one loses value as a human being over time. But we live in a world that doesn't value kids either, and doesn't value babies because they don't work and they don't vote and they don't make money, right? So, I mean, hello, global capitalism. So a world of age equity, and I love the name of your organization, is an organization that supports all ages across the lifespan ideally at the scale and when we need it. We need help when we have little children, if you have kids, but we also want a world that doesn't prioritize biology or biological parenting. We need to support families in all their forms and so on. And of course, families by definition involve people of all ages.
Absolutely. It's brilliant. We do have a comment that came in. So are there interview tips on addressing this type of bias without it being said? So does having 30 years experience and being a technical quote master become a liability in the interview process? That's from Noel.
I mean, I want to hear your answer to that as well, Sheila. I have been self-employed for so long that, let me say, I do not have personal experience trying to land an interview. I have heard countless gut-wrenching stories from people who have sent out hundreds of resumes, and maybe they get past the first few, but the minute the company or the HR person susses out that they are no longer young, the door closes, if indeed it was ever open. I'm an incredibly blunt and direct person, which not everyone can afford to be. So please take this with a grain of salt. We each need to navigate this stuff in our own way. And we all have, if you have to feed your kids and pay your rent, you are up against forces that I am not, and I respect whatever choice you make. But it does seem to me that I know it's problematic to try and get the interviewer to acknowledge age, because if they do, then they are liable then they admit that they're using age as a hiring factor in the decision, and they are become liable. But I do wonder, I have thought about this, if there isn't a way to say, I know you're bummed because I'm not 12. No, more subtle than that, but perhaps you're, to think before you go into the interview about where you think their age-related hesitation may lie, and to bring it into the room explicitly by saying, the most common myth of all, which you already know, is that older people can't use technology. We can learn anything that is necessary to making a living. I'm no techno whiz, believe me, but I have learned to be competent in social media, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have an income, right? For example. So, so to say, for example, if the question is social media or Excel or whatever it is, by the way, I have, done 9,000 reports on, using this software, or to turn what you surmise might be their deficits, the deficits that are related to your experience, overtly, explicitly into, it's just crazy that experience should be seen as a liability. So I would love your take on that. One of the tricky questions, and I don't have a good answer to this, is the sort of suggestion or inference that, the you're overqualified line, will try me because I might be willing to, accept a lower position, work fewer hours, a lower salary. I would never want to say that. And yet I wonder if there is some way. What do you think about emphasizing the ways in which older workers may have more flexibility, and at least get the employer to consider that?
Well, I'm like you. I've seen and heard and even experienced myself, just rejection, such rejection and heart-wrenching, just like you said.
Horrible.
But that said, I know I have heard of at least one woman who she just upfront laid it on the table straight up, and I think that there's power in that. And she ended up getting the job.
I do too.
So there is power about addressing that elephant in the room. And because if you bring it up, then you can start having a conversation around it. What does it mean to you? What are you really looking for? I have all of this experience and I love to learn and I do this and I do that. And what are you really looking for? And kind of putting their mind at rest. I used to, I would get so angry because I would apply for jobs and not even get an interview, or I would get an interview and then be told I was, quote, overqualified. And so I used to get angry and I would post on LinkedIn I made this big, a graphic. There is no such thing as overqualified, only qualified or not qualified, And so, but I would like to think, again, going back to kind of the trends that I'm seeing in the workplace, is that, and part of it may be to the fact that there's this, quote, talent shortage, and employers are having to think outside the age box.
Why the air quotes? Is there not, in fact, a labor shortage?
Think outside the age box in order to recruit talent. They're looking in places, and at people that they've never looked at before. And that's fantastic because, I think
all the way across the scale, not just for white workers, obviously, but for service workers who are abused and underpaid systemically for decades.
Yes, yes. I think about people who are caregivers. You know, they make
Mhm.
minimum wage, and that's
Why would we pay the people who do the intimate work of caring for the people we love best? I won't even finish the sentence.
Yeah,
How
right.
about a living wage? How about health insurance? How about disability? How about job security?
Yeah. How about that? So tell us about, in the last few minutes that we have, Ashton, tell us about what you're working on, you know,
Well,
what are,
I have an idea. I want to put out there. I read, who isn't reading about how the pandemic has profoundly altered the nature of work, the way companies organize, where people work, improving, hopefully, office life, where, everyone used to, commute in to sit in a cubicle and have headphones all to isolate themselves from all the people that they were in the same room with, which is sort of nutty. I want people to realize that a lot of the accommodations to remote work that magically became possible when COVID struck are accommodations. And I don't even like that word because it implies that you have some sort of special need. And there's nothing special about wanting access to the tools that enable you to perform your job well, that people with disabilities have been asking for decades. So one really good way to be a good ally to people with disabilities is to insist to employers that these changes remain permanent.
absolutely. I love that. That's really important. And I think that even for all people, flexibility is so key, and the requirements or the need or for flexibility is different. I remember one of my great learnings from a manager many years ago was that wants are negotiable, but needs are not. And so the way someone defines a need, whether it's special care for their children. So for example, when I worked in the corporate world, my youngest son, who's now almost 20, he struggled to learn how to read. And so I'm going to my manager and I'm doing all these flexible work things. I'm trying every single flexible work, option I could think of to try to create pockets of time that I could spend with him. That was not a want, that was a need. And had the organization said no to me, well, I would have had to have said no to them. And I mean, that's what we're seeing by what they're calling by this great resignation.
Yeah.
People are just saying no.
But of course, a lot of times that's something at great risk or hardship. So let's work on trying to reduce the harm. I mean, I'm very excited by the sort of general movement a little bit towards workers' rights. And I love your framing around overqualified. And it does seem to me, again, not speaking as someone with, my kids' lunches on the line, but if you can say you might be worried that I'm overqualified, I love your line. Here's the issue. I am qualified. You want someone who can do this job. Here are all the reasons I can do this job. And to point out, I mean, another common, thing that people think, I don't know if it's really a stereotype, is that older workers, it is true that older workers do tend to stay on the job longer and be more loyal. Now, lest I fall into those shiftless young people that jump around all the time, that's not the case. When you and I were in our 30s or 20s and we're trying to figure out what we wanted to be, we jumped around too a lot. That is not because, insert your generational label, are lazy, disloyal, whatever. It is
Right.
an age effect, not a cohort effect. It is a function of being that stage of life, not being born in a certain era, right? So to say, there's more, but to say there's more turnover. If you think I will be more expensive, first of all, make me an offer. And second of all, factor into that what the research shows about the price of turnover of younger employees, because you won't have that problem with me.
Absolutely. We just had a comment come in. Let's see what our comment is. And I will say we are almost out of time with Ashton. So if you have any other questions or comments, please drop them in the chat now. Shake says, Overqualified is a fear from the manager that you will want to take their job.
Oh, for God's sake.
So insecurity, there's so much insecurity. People make decisions that are fear-based, not based out of possibility, so how can we shift that mindset? That would be amazing to do that. So while I'm waiting to see if there are any other last minute questions that come in, I want to share at least what we have coming up in the rest of the afternoon. Coming up at noon at the top of the next hour, we have a Daniel Jolis, who is a psychologist, and he is a researcher, and he's a current PhD candidate studying age and decision-making around age. He is going to be presenting on implicit bias and the controversies and critical perspectives, because I think that we all know that implicit bias training has taken a hard and heavy rap, and he talks about that, and he even challenges it himself. So that's a very interesting session. I've heard him facilitate it before, and he is absolutely brilliant. So that's coming up at 12. And then we have after that, I'm back again on the floor, and I'll be talking about how age equity impacts a culture of belonging. And that is really one of my passion training sessions, because belonging is so important. And belonging, it encompasses this sense of trust that employees have to have for their organization. And the fact of the matter is, when younger workers see older workers being displaced or not being given opportunities to develop or be promoted, let me tell you, that's registering. And that creates this shadow fear of future ageism, and it disrupts their sense of trust and belonging with an organization. So very passionate about that topic, and I look forward to it. And then at 3 o'clock, we will be talking with labor and employment attorney Meyer Nassar, also a member of our board. And he's going to be telling us all about, there's a lot. I don't know, Ashton, if you have looked this up or not, but I was stunned. I went out to congress.gov and I looked up all the legislation that had to do with age. There are like hundreds of things out there, but Meyer's going to be talking to us about the most pressing ones, and why we all need to be writing our senators and asking them for their support.
It does seem like it should be a bipartisan issue.
You would think, but if you look at the way people are voting, it's not. And that makes me crazy.
Way lies madness.
Okay, I'll back off on that one. But that's, you check the voting records and there you go. So I don't see any more comments or questions coming in from the chat. So Ashton, I do want to thank you for sharing your time with us today and talking about this. And thank you to Noel and Shaka.
Great work with AEA. You are doing an important work really, really well. And I predict a bold, bright future.
Awesome. Well, I think we do it together, Ashton. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.